today's meeting of St. John Common Council Finance Committee to order. Item 2.1 is minutes of March 19th.
Moved.
Take a mover, the mayor, a seconder, Councillor Radwin. On the question, all in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item 3 is the approval of the agenda. No changes, so it's as was distributed.
Moved.
Excuse me. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Radwin. All in favor, aye. Contrary minded, carried. Any disclosures of conflict of interest? Seeing none, we'll move on. There's nothing on the consent agenda, which takes us to business matters. Item 6. Item 6 is a referral from Common Council with regards to internal audit of the winter snow management plan. And I'll read the motion. If there's a seconder, we'll carry on from there. So the motion is that council requests that the Finance Committee add an internal audit of the city winter management plan to its list of internal audits. The Finance Committee is asked to consider this request at the next meeting. So I'll move that. Councillor Radwin, you're seconding it. Over to the CFO for an introduction to some staff. You're here to answer questions, and then we'll check in with you, Mayor. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. I do want to advise we have a couple of key staff here with respect to this motion, and I encourage you to ask any and all questions to satisfy yourselves with respect to the motion. We have our Director of Finance, Jody Forgy, here, who would oversee the internal audit that's being proposed. We also have the Commissioner of Public Works, Michael Hugenholtz, in attendance, who's responsible for the service area. So any questions that the committee may have, please bring them forward. Thank you.
Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to, I don't know, Jody or Mike, whoever wants to cover this. I'm just wondering, what exactly are you going to be looking for when you're doing the audit, specifically, to try to enhance services? And secondly, I'm just wondering on timeline, you know, if this passes, what are we kind of looking for a timeline? I had already talked to CFO Fudge, and he had mentioned that nothing should have to really be put on the back burner, I believe. So just kind of curious about those two things.
Director Forgy, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Through you to Councillor Radwan. So for us, once we're kind of waiting to do further deep dive until we get a formal approval to go ahead, because it was brought forward outside of our department, but we're definitely able to accommodate it from an internal audit standpoint. And I believe we could probably start working on it this fall. We're finishing up our enterprise risk management work. And then I actually didn't have anything proposed yet moving forward. So we would come back with a scope of work, budget and timeline, but it won't, it should be able to be accommodated on my end, but I still need to speak to Commissioner Hugenholtz on his end for capacity, because it will take a lot of their time as well. So if he wants to speak to that part, happy to have that. And then in terms of the scope, we will definitely go through and look at it from a holistic point of view. From what I understand, we want to look at the whole winter management program. I know the presentation that was brought forward was specific to sidewalk maintenance, but I'm sure we kind of want to look overall. So once we get into the scope, it may require a couple phases of work depending on workload. But we would definitely come back with more refined information after it's approved. And I can hand it over to Commissioner Hugenholtz if he wants to add anything at all.
Thank you, Director Forgy, and good evening, committee members. I would simply add that in terms of supporting a internal audit, we'll certainly, direct some resources towards that. I wouldn't want that to take away from some of the opportunity areas that we already know that we are working on. So we'll work closely with the internal audit team to scope that out appropriately and make sure we're looking into the right things. The only other thing I'd add on the motion is just, again, some of the overall background and context. Council will recall, as part of the sustainability efforts, there were significant reductions made to the winter management service back in 2020. So we would have sent about 11 plow trucks to auction at that time, and we basically eliminated 16 positions that would normally work in this service area. So there were no service level adjustments that were made at that time. What the undertaking was that, there were some measures that we were taking to try to sustain the same level of service. We changed some of the routing. We balanced our shifts night and day a little bit more. We did a few other things, but the intent was always that we were just going to have to experience and go through a few winter cycles under a period of somewhat stability for us to see, are we able to meet those deliverables still under the new model with the current resource levels. And certainly this past season, of course, was very challenging. One of the more challenging winters we've had since those reductions were made. And we experienced some significant challenges, especially on the equipment front. And I guess I would say that is where we, again, we did eliminate a number of plow trucks. So that got rid of all of our redundancy on equipment. So, plowing streets and sidewalks in the wintertime can be very hard on equipment, and it's, not unusual to have, 25-30% of your trucks down at any one time, and that may be for months, it may be for hours. So we are able to kind of work on those and get those back on stream, but that's one of the particular challenges we experienced this past year. So, in thinking about potential improvements or enhancements, I think that would be one of our focus areas, is that, maybe we have to look at the amortization on the current equipment. Maybe we got to try and smooth the curve a little bit in terms of the replacement cycle. But that was a challenge this year for sure.
Chair, if I can, that's great, Commissioner Hugenholtz. Can I make a comment? First, I just wanted to say thank you, because I think it was a great motion that you put forward. But I'd also like to say, so some things that I'm kind of hoping to see as an outcome is direction on maybe recommendations on equipment. I know that we also have a lot of fairly new staff. Like we don't have all of that knowledge that some people would have after working 20 years on the job. So is there recommendations that maybe would come up on training? Because you know what, we can all use more training in our areas, right? So is there anything that way? So I'm kind of hoping to see maybe there is recommendations for different things for different routes. There could be some time management issues that, a new set of eyes looking at this could go, well, what about this? And somebody could go, well, I've never thought about that. Actually, that might actually work. So sometimes it allows you to have some time to problem solve doing these sort of things where, it was a chaotic winter. So, I'm totally empathetic to staff just trying to roll with the punches, because it felt like the staff were getting punched over and over and over again trying to go through the winter. It was miserable. So
Thanks, Councillor. And I think, if this motion passes, as Director Forgy had mentioned, scope of work will come back, and we'll have a good idea at that point in time, what bits and pieces get looked at. And I certainly purposely refrain from bringing my own thoughts forward, because at this point, because I know that there's a particular skill set that internal audit has to look at stuff, and before you use the term holistic, which I think is good. So yeah, if this moves on to the next stage, I think that scope of work conversation will be right along the lines of some of the things you were mentioning. Your Worship, over to you.
I just had a couple of questions. I'm not concerned about the scope of the winter management plan. I think that defines what the audit will be. But I was curious about who does the audits. Can we accommodate it? And will we get information of what would be bumped if something has to be bumped, so that we can make that decision of what goes forward? Thank you.
Thanks. Director?
Okay. Thanks for the question. And so nothing currently will be bumped. It's good timing for us from the internal audit point of view. In terms of who will do the work, like it will start off with me leading the engagement from our internal side, but I would not be doing it alone. We would certainly have expertise of parties outside of the organization to help with the review, especially if we're looking at things like the tools and monitoring we do on the performance of the service levels, looking at the tools as our experts that use those tools already that can help us with them. In terms of like preventative maintenance on our equipment, there's experts out there that can help us in that way too. So the great thing about internal audit is you can leverage experts in the field. We have them internally too, but they often don't have time because they already have a full work schedule, and these people have ability to go look at many organizations and provide some great information. So I do have a budget available for that as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, not seeing any more questions, I'll call the question. So, on the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Contrary minded? Carried. Thanks very much. And takes us to item 6.2, which is the January to March year-to-date general and utility fund financial results. And we'll go to our controller, Craig Levine. Mr. Levine.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to share my screen here. Excellent. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide the Finance Committee with an high-level overview of our January to March 2025 financial results for the general and utility fund. This overview will show that the majority of the variances is really as a result of timing differences. And I do want to highlight overall, there have not been any large unanticipated expenditures, but there are a few that I'm going to highlight throughout the presentation, particularly in Public Works. So here's just a snapshot of our general fund year-to-date results with an overall positive variance of just over $3.368 million versus budget. Our year-to-date revenues came in just over $900,000 higher than budgeted. The biggest driver is related to a very strong first quarter in our building permit revenue. They've actually exceeded their annual budget, so that is absolutely great news for the city. And here's just a breakdown of our expenditure variance by category: our wages and benefits, goods and services, our fiscal and other charges. Over the next few slides, I'm just going to speak about a few of the variances within each of the service areas. Under our growth and development services, they were just shy of $65,000 positive variance. If you look at the details in your package, you'll see a very large variance in the affordable housing with grants paid out. But I just want to highlight that overage is offset by grant revenue, so it's really net nothing. Our public safety, just over $257,000 positive variance, and that's largely due to vacancies. Our utilities and infrastructure, $238,000 positive variance, largely due to vacancies as well as timing on some of the goods and services. I do want to highlight there was some unexpected costs that have incurred to date. One in insurance came in over budget, as well as there's additional costs associated with the end of the cold shelter. So, we continue to monitor that, but that may have an impact on the year-end results. Our public works transportation services overall year-to-date variance of $345,000. Overall, the majority of the variance relates to timing of expenses to budget, and I've listed asphalt here as a good example. But I do want to highlight there are some financial pressures that need to be highlighted. Winter maintenance is anticipated to be over budget. The costs incurred to date for 2025 and salt, sand, equipment have been over budget. We're likely going to see arenas come in over budget. That's due to work for the multiplex, but that will be offset by reserves. Lastly, we've had some unanticipated infrastructure failures and stormwater that's driving our costs. So it's very likely we will be over budget in that service area. Again, the Commissioner Hugenholtz and his team continue to monitor that and will do what they can to alleviate that. But these are just a couple of points that we do want to highlight for Finance Committee. And lastly, for general fund, strategic services, corporate services, and other charges all have positive variance. The majority of the variance is a combination of vacancies and timing of the goods and services. And next, we'll talk about St. John Water has a surplus of $641,000 year to date. Here's just an overview of the surplus of wages and benefits versus our goods and services. Overall, year to date, revenue is a positive variance of just over $100,000. Today, we are seeing interest revenue slightly higher than budget, as well as some additional miscellaneous revenue due to some unanticipated revenues that came from selling some stumpage fees, as well as some funding that we received as part of the Environmental Trust. For expenditures, the majority of variances in drinking water and wastewater relate to wage allocations. Industrial water services relate, the variances related to a large leak detection project that is anticipated to occur later this year. So in conclusion, the overall financial results can largely be attributed to vacancies and timing issues in goods and services. As noted in the presentation, there are some financial pressures, particularly in our public works, due to the past winter and infrastructure failures that may impact year-end results if we cannot mitigate those. And for that, I recommend that the Finance Committee receive and file this presentation, and all staff are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Levine.
I was going to say I'll move that.
Okay, thanks, Your Worship. Moving the receive and file, seconded by Councillor Radwin. Questions for staff? Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have a question, actually. I think it looks quite good. I mean, I think, you know, it always kind of reminds me that, you know, when we go through this, that I'm always worried about our huge infrastructure deficit because, you know, we can have emergencies at any time with that almost $550 million infrastructure deficit. It's hard to, it makes it hard to manage. But the other thing that I was thinking about, and I have spoken to the chief about this before, I certainly don't want to take away any work from fire, but I always wonder if we should be thinking about volunteer firefighting to try to utilize it so that people can get on site, see what the firefighters do for recruitment purposes. I don't want to see us decrease any of the jobs that we have, but I certainly want them to have more people coming up through the pipeline. So I don't know. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there as a food for thought for today. But sometimes it is a really good way to recruit. So anyway, something to think about.
Thanks, Councillor. Your Worship, any questions? Are we good?
Good.
Good. Yep. So on the receive and file, I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. That brings us to item 6.3, which is, you know, because it's May, the 2026 operating budget, looking at timeline, shape your budget, and all things planning to do our budget. And we'll stay with our controller, Mr. Levine. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the members of the Finance Committee. I'm not going to share my presentation. I'm just going to make a couple of points. It's very similar to what we've done in the past couple of years. So, you know, I think, again, we're going to be seeking the input of public on our 2026 budget through the city's Shape Your Budget platform. We are planning another town hall meeting, and as well, Chair normally seeks the input from other council members early fall. So again, that is in the timelines that we have set out. This will be our third year for this type of public engagement, and you know, we are hopeful that we will continue to see the increases over prior years. We have seen, you know, an increase each year. Our open houses weren't quite as successful last year, but we're hopeful with our strong communication teams that we're going to get that message out and have a very good open house. So really the presentation is more or less just for information purposes only, and the recommendation is just to receive and file it, and certainly happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, certainly over the last couple of years, we are refining our craft at getting our budget started early and going through this process. I'll save my point for last. Councillor or your worship, any comments or questions?
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Radwin. My only suggestion is, sorry,
Sorry, I was gonna
Go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say one point. I think that, obviously it was the first year last year that we were really getting this kind of engagement, but I don't know, how do we get more people involved? And I guess, I'm not really looking for anybody to answer it necessarily today, but is there a way for communications to get it out there a little bit more? Do we need to throw in some sort of a contest, or do we need to try to pull in community centers, or what can we do to get more engagement? I mean, I think we can all certainly try to push it out there now that some people ended up figuring it out after we did it. So I'm sure they'll be maybe looking for it this year. So I think we'll get more engagement. But anyway, I don't really want to ask the question. I think we just need to think about how do we get it out there more. So, maybe Lisa Kennedy might have some great ideas. Would be my recommendation, have those conversations.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, well, Shape Your City, the online response last year doubled from the year before. And, I'm hopeful that the same people who did last year will do again, and everybody brings a friend. The curling club and sandling club I belong to, if you want people to come out to a meeting, tell them you're going to put their dues up, which may bring some people out this year and lead into my comment for folks taking notes. In the Shape Your City questions, question 3 in the presentation says, if the city exceeded tax-based growth targets for 2026 and therefore had the option to reduce the property tax rate or increase services, what would be your preference? Perhaps that's 3A, and 3B would be if the city does not meet the tax-based growth target, whether that's because of a freeze, or it could also be a lasting question moving forward. Therefore, the option is to increase the property tax rate or reduce services. What would be your preference? Not to take too much away from the presentation later on the agenda, but certainly that's a situation we may be looking at for 2026. So I think it's a question we want to get ahead of. And that's really my only thought on it. I think we're continuing in a good direction with the consultation and the thoughtful process we go through for our budget. So on the receive and file, I'll call the question. I signify by raising your hand or saying aye. Contrary-minded and carried. Item 6.4 is the 5-year capital plan, and for that we'll go to, is it Commissioner Fogan?
It is, yes. Yep.
I got one right. Good for me. Commissioner Fogan, over to you.
Mr. works for Ian too. That's all good. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep, I'm pleased to provide this update. I'll share my screen here. To confirm that that's showing for everybody else. Okay, perfect. So you remember in May, or I guess April, sorry, this is May's update. In April, I was here explaining a little bit the process. So in this slide presentation, we included a couple of slides that I think that are important to always remember, especially from the public standpoint of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we included a couple of those slides, and we'll probably do the same again in June, and then with council, and then again, just to reiterate what the purpose of our 5-year capital plan is. And also we included the how it works, how we get there, how we what we're going to use it for, I guess, how we get projects on there. Also, just a reminder of where we should be shooting for. I appreciate Councillor Radwan pointing out the infrastructure deficit is something always on our mind, but according to our infrastructure deficit, this is from a couple of years ago, but we should be spending over 37 million on the general fund capital. And when we did our analysis on the past 5 years, we're spending around just under 30, around 29.5 million is where our spend has been. Also, just for the public standpoint, a question often comes up of how we figure out what we're going to do first and what we do second. And we do have an infrastructure deficit. We are trying to catch up. How we take advantage of that. This is straight from our capital budgeting policy, and it has steps here for us to follow on capital prioritization. First, mandatory, risk, priority of council, positive financial impact, and then discretionary. So work to date since we last met in April, projects have been prioritized for 2026 based on funding. Submitted capital projects have been placed per year. And there are many projects that don't make the draft 5-year list based on funding levels as well. We have kind of categorized each project into streams, and they may not make the 5-year plan as it currently exists. Funding levels have been estimated and clarified for which programs are confirmed. So we do have some confirmed funding, others that we're estimating. And if identified, or if the plan is approved, we've identified which projects also need funding applications coming up, which ones we haven't applied for yet. Also, this funding tangled web is how I described it on here, but it has put a spotlight on the opportunity for perhaps some increased financial analysis of the capital program. Are we fully leveraging the funding that we can be? Many of our programs require stacking or allow stacking, some don't. Some they consider the CCBF or the gas tax our own funds, others they don't. Anyway, it can be quite complicated to figure out if we are actually maximizing and if we are utilizing all the funding buckets that are available. So in our work to do, what we plan to do between now and have this finalized, as you know, it is a living document, so it'll never be finalized, but at least we'll have it to a place where we can get the 2026 capital budget advanced, and that's really our goal every year, is to have that capital budget approved for the next year, and to make that much easier to do when we come around to it. But assumed funding levels also need to develop by year. Right now, we generated it based on average, except for 2026. We're using actual, but we need to do that for every year. Our parks condition assessment needs to be completed, and projects need to be submitted from departments using our capital budget priority criteria. Oftentimes, our engineering group may not be fully aware of just the condition or a safety change, or if something has become mandatory. The 2029 Canada Games, as you know, we are a successful co-host of the 2029 Canada Games, so those projects need to be detailed and inserted into our capital budget as well. We've started that process, but they're not in the detailed form that we would like. And a prioritization for capital budget policy then needs to be reapplied for every year. And we need to continue to refine budget estimates and clarify project scopes. That will be something just a continuous intake, continuously doing that. We also need to layer in the utility capital budget. As an example, on street reconstructions, there's a component for both the utility fund and the general fund. And we need to make sure that the utility budget can afford some of the projects under there, and to make sure that component lines up between the utility fund and the capital fund. Or the general fund, sorry. And then we also need to apply our 80-20 renew versus new requirements. This slide is just a reminder of all the funding buckets that we do have, and these are just the buckets. And when you layer on projects under this, you can have multiple, even dozens of projects that fall under each one of these. And some of these, like I said, some you can stack, some you can't. Some may fund a part of it. When you look at large reconstructions, there could be pieces like the Active Transportation Fund may fund a bike lane or a sidewalk, but won't fund other parts of the project. Whereas the IBA agreements or the CCBF, they might fund the entirety of it. So figuring out those portions is becoming increasingly difficult. We've included in this slide, it's very small, which is why we we included an attachment in the kit separately. We started to generate this for every year, and there was no way it was going to be readable through a PowerPoint. So we included in the kit a separate attachment for every year for 2026 through the 5-year plan. So some of the challenges that that are coming up that we see. So funding from others we're seeing is not necessarily completely aligned with the city's capital budget priorities. So there'll be some decisions there that made. Sometimes our priorities are being driven by our funding agreements. So it's being driven then by other levels of government and not necessarily our own capital budget policy. Also, capital construction costs in a lot of areas have doubled in the last 5 years since pre-pandemic. And this is not just unique to us. This is everybody. Every city, every municipality has their long-term financial plans, and nobody developed a long-term financial plan with the expectation that capital construction costs might double within that period of time. So everybody's facing the same crunch, where that makes lessens the blow a little bit, but it is part of the reality of where we are. And of course, there are some more plans coming that we do need to layer in and we need to think about, such as the stormwater separation strategies, the North End neighborhood plan, city market strategic plan projects. The plan's been approved, but we need those projects put in there. And growth or new or expanded infrastructure also puts some pressure on capital spending too. This is it's a good thing that we have this kind of pressure now, that we need to sometimes alter our plans based on a density project or an expansion project that provides for housing and also provides for good tax base revenue, but it certainly has changed the way we put some capital planning projects together. And other large projects could be on the horizon, like the East Side Multiplex as well. Just a quick timeline. Again, we're here in May with the draft 5-year plan for Finance Committee. Our next step is to present a 5-year plan to Council as well for receive and file, with the goal that we receive some input and refinement, and we continue to work on that both from a staff and from Council perspective, so that come August, we're ready to present a 5-year capital plan and also the 2026 capital budget to Council. And then 25 and beyond, it's ongoing refinement and updating. And with that, it is recommended that presentation be received and filed.
Thanks, Commissioner. Questions for staff?
I'll move, receive, and file.
Thanks for the move.
I love the presentation.
Second by Councillor Radlin. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I just really wanted to, I keep thinking about this for myself as well when I'm advocating. It's like how, we have a challenge getting engagement, civic engagement, right? How do we make sure that we're actually doing some things that people really want? And I was reminded last night at a meeting that I should be advocating for a splash pad. It seems to be coming up very often on the east side. So, and it's not a council priority, right? And I'm telling people, well, it's not a council priority. And they're like, well, what about the field house? Well, field house is on the move. Well, what about one going in the field house? So how do we make sure we're kind of aligning with those feelings of need for amenities, especially with the growth? Like you said, Ian, it's challenging. How do we do that? How can we better do that, I think?
That's a good question. That is a solid question. I don't know if Kevin has some input there on how, or Brent, maybe how we funnel those projects in and how we layer in those priorities. We do follow our city strategic plan, and there are council priority setting sessions, but individually after that.
I'll take a shot at it before the senior staff jumps in. One of the things I've really liked about the processes and the way we do things is our budgeting, our capital and our operational budgets come from our plans. All 683 vetted, researched, sometimes consulted plans. And So I guess my advice before I turn it over to the CAO, CFO, that's what, new projects that people come up with and are lobbying for need to get included into plans, and it's a real danger to I'm so pleased, and I know you are too, Councillor, about the fact that we make decisions based on long-term plans and financial plans. And this 5-year plan is a good example of another step forward, rather than 11 of us coming to a weekend every fall and arguing about what projects we're going to do for the next year. It makes a lot of sense. That would be my 2 cents. Anyway, CFO Fudge, well, over to you, and then the CAO came on and then disappeared. We'll see if he has any input.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. You addressed the first half of what my response is going to be with being a strategic process. I think having a 5-year plan will also go a long way to provide the community an outlook. We typically have budgeted on a year-to-year basis, and it's very difficult to understand what's coming next. You may get snippets of it at a council meeting, but you don't really have a fulsome look at it. So I think that's going to help. We also have, asset management, where we try to do things on a risk-based approach based on level of service to the community. And that could be recreation assets, it could be any asset that provides level of service. And with respect to the splash pad, one of the things that is easy to segregate in our capital plans is because of the size of our infrastructure deficit, things like splash pads are new investments. And we do have parameters around that as well with respect to, we have a certain amount in the portfolio that we can afford for new, and that's prescribed in our policies. And I think right now for the general fund, it's 85-15 or 80-20, sorry, 80-20. So that allows the council to discuss and prioritize where they want those new investments to be placed and how those new investments align with the strategic plans they have already approved. So I do think it's a strategic approach. But transparency and long-term planning will go a long way for the public to understand where we're heading.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that's great. I think, it's wonderful that we've, really kind of pushed density in the central core, which is absolutely what every municipality should do. And now we're kind of moving into the north end, and with the new schools coming in, we're seeing playgrounds happening in the south end. Now we're seeing like street alignments, kind of, some new streets, street turning lanes for the north end to align with the school, which we have to do with the new infrastructure. But I am challenged, and I'm sure Ward 1 councillors are challenged too, because then the conversation moves to everything's going uptown, everything's going north. And I'm like, well, yeah, you get 99 King going in the south end. Do you want that next to your house? A great big building? I don't, and we do want development out east too. Like, we don't want to stop development there either. But, but really the core needs to grow and be the thriving area of the city, because that's what it's supposed to be. And then connecting it to the north end makes sense, right? But then, at the same time, we do need to keep in mind that as the city's growing, and, you have the east side saying there's no splash pad east, but there's one everywhere else. There's no community center east, but there's one everywhere else. Luckily, we can say now we have a community development officer in the east side, because there wasn't one before. But so, but good changes can be made. I'm letting people know about the volleyball courts and the res, right? Like that's a real win for the east side, right? We've invested money in the Forest Hills playground, kind of reiterating that as well. So, but we do have to keep in mind east and west absolutely need some investments too. So, what, maybe we, try to continuously be creative. But I know the splash pad is definitely on a lot of minds, especially the ones that have little ones at home, unlike myself. But I totally understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I've heard that too, Councillor, and I've often tried to give some boundaries and remind people, while the west side has a splash pad, Ward 1 does not, right? The mayor's ward has 3, or has 2. Nor does actually Ward 1 have a community center. So
Now 3,
What?
because one on the boardwalk too. So they actually have 3.
Oh, that's right. You're right. I forgot about that one. Anyway, yeah. Your worship, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
I thought I might as well chime in on this since it sounds like you're Santa Claus and we're adding our wish list to you. One thing I'll say is that, we can only spend $1 once, and Pat Woods taught me that years ago. And we did not all agree on the 3-cent reduction in the tax rate. Some of us thought it should have been more. So you can't advocate for a tax rate cut and say we need goodies, So, and that's the balance I think that this council has been good at. We've tried to reduce the tax rate, and we've tried to harness, what our spending is. And then I look at what needs and what wants are. If I could trade, I do have 3 splash pads in my ward, Lower West, which doesn't work great apparently, but the other 2. But if I could trade those 3, and I could get the field house over here, the pickleball courts, and the res, I'd do that in a second. Because that's really what people want, is that real, opportunity to get into water that's not a shower that comes up from the bottom, but it'll do in a pinch. So I guess, and how do we create that equity for our residents as we look across, who needs what? It's not just about fairness, about putting a splash pad on every corner. It's what's really works for the population that you have and what amenities. We're not going to get another arts and culture center. We're only going to get one of those, and it's going to be East. So how we balance that, and we all have a little bit of whatever. So I felt I had to chime in on that, because we will not have if you want to call it fairness with some of those big buys, but we try to create that equity for all of the wards as we go forward. So anyways, thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. It brings up an interesting thought in my mind, about how we talk about things. I think Councillor Radlin's doing a great job of being an example of exactly how we're set up. Councillor's advocating for what she's hearing in her ward, which is what should happen, and it comes, to the table of 11 of us, and we see if it fits and where it fits. I don't mind at all, Councillor Radlin, hearing you advocate for what you're hearing out your way. But and this is beyond Finance Committee. We have so many staff and senior staff here listening. How do we talk to ourselves as a city? We are so many different neighborhoods. This is how I see it. Maybe we need to amplify and continue to celebrate the uniqueness of each parts of the city. I spent a couple of years lifeguarding at the res. It's gorgeous. But not everybody has a res. West has a Dominion Park. But that's it. Certainly the South Central Peninsula, it's got the splash pads, and they get the stairs down to the bay. I would advise against going for a swim at the bottom of the steps or even on beautiful Tin Can Beach, right? But how do we help our neighbors feel proud and celebrate the uniqueness of what we have? I think that would go a long way. Anyway, that's a total tangent. Commissioner, I do have a question, actually. The 80-20 rule, do we look at that we have to hit those targets, or is, would that be a 20% maximum new? If we thought council one year that, they're just for whatever reason, we thought we needed to do more renewal, or do we try by policy to hit that 80-20? CFO Fudge, I see.
Yeah, I'll take that question. I have another comment as well. The purpose for the 80-20 was to address infrastructure deficit, and that gets moved and toggled and changed as we get newer refreshes of the infrastructure deficit. So the point of that is, we want to actually address our infrastructure deficit. We got to be, putting funds towards that deficit, and that is a policy that allows us to do that. And Finance Committee really is the oversight on it. So, as all our policies, these policies are brought back from time to time for review by the Finance Committee, and when results change, we can change that to reflect newer realities. So hopefully, infrastructure deficit falls in the future, and that becomes a 60-40 or 70-30 that allows us to do more for the community. So
Sure.
I just want to comment on the discussion you're having. This is an excellent discussion. And I think what you're seeing just by virtue of having this topic is you're pivoting from an annual budget to a vision for the community. And, you know, I think one of the things, and I think Mr. Fogan mentioned this, but I want to reiterate, this is not a 5-year locked-in budget. This is very different than a budget. This is a living document, and it'll evolve. It'll evolve as strategies change, as priorities change of council, and that's the beauty of this. And all those decisions get made around the horseshoe. So I think it's a good tool that will be a vision and will align with our overall strategy that's approved by council. And I think it's going to help us really secure more funding, because we often get asked, what are your priorities? And we can normally not provide much more than a single year. So I think this is an excellent start. Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, no worries. And my comment on it, I really, you know, I know our staff have been working on it. I've been looking forward to having this in front of us for a couple of years now. And not just to help show ourselves and our residents what is happening over the next couple of years. But as Mr. Fogan has rightly pointed out, we can't do this without our partners. And sometimes what we might have on for next year as a St. John priority might not be the province's priority, or might not be the Fed's priority. But if they can look and say, well, you know, that thing that you've got planned 4 or 5 years down the road, we would like to move that ahead. I think if it's important enough to be on our plan, we can be flexible enough to see the level of partnered funding that's going to come with it. And if it moves up because the funding is available. And staff has done a great job in the past of doing that, because they've had their kind of lists in the background. You know, really, we just haven't necessarily seen it overtly. And I think this would make for an easier conversation with our partners, you know, especially like really if we happen to have a partner that had some revenue, Secretary of State for Revenue. Hey, we have one of those now. Congratulations to MP Long. Perhaps it's time to have a conversation with our well-deserved newly minted Secretary of State for Revenue and with the province with our list. We want them to be familiar with this too, because they might see something in what's coming that we might not. And I know that partnership has worked out well for us in the past. So congratulations to MP Long. Looking forward to working with you on our long-term list. So I'll just put that out there into the world. So did we move the receive and file? Was it a receive and file, Commissioner, or are we moving this on to council?
No, it's a receive. Well, it is a receive and file, and there's a in June. Yeah, it's a receive and file for council in June as well.
Oh, okay. So receive and file and sending it to council. Okay, and it's been moved and seconded. So on the motion, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Thanks very much. That brings us to item 6.5, which is an update from the CFO on the property tax freeze, fiscal reform, early expectations on changes from the province that will affect our budget. So CFO Fudge, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody see the screen or see my slides? Yes? Okay. Two bills have been brought forward in the provincial legislature, as everybody knows, that will significantly impact the development of the city's 2026 budget. Some good news and some not so good news. The good news being we received some details on a proposed fiscal reform package. The bad news being the province has announced plans to freeze property tax assessments for the 2026 budget year. So with fiscal reform, we expected what was going to be announced. We knew there was a fiscal reform package coming. It was introduced as Bill 33, and it's included in your kit. I think the bill is entitled An Act to Amend the Community Funding Act. And that brought forth a package that was worth an estimated value of $63 million in new funding opportunities for municipalities through a modernized and topped-up equalization fund, a new capital renewal fund, which is excellent because it's focused on supporting all the non-sexy assets. They're replacing the existing municipal infrastructure, so it's a real big need for municipalities, as well as increased funding in regional services support funds that will fund up to 50% of any eligible projects within the Fundy Regional Service Commission or any Regional Service Commission mandate, all through an application process. We have yet to learn what allocation St. John or the Fundy Regional Service Commission is expected to receive from the fiscal funding model. However, we would expect to obtain those details in the coming weeks to allow, as we know, municipalities have to prepare their 2026 capital and operating budgets. On to the bad news. A little over a week ago, the province unexpectedly introduced legislation to freeze property assessments in New Brunswick for the fiscal year 2026. The Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick estimates this freeze could cost municipalities upwards to $58 million, which almost negates the estimated $63 million benefit of fiscal reform that was introduced in the same week. There are some exceptions noted in the legislation, and the legislation is called Bill 22, and it's entitled An Act Respecting Property Tax Affordability Measures, which has been included in your kit as well. The exceptions to the freeze are assessment from new construction will be fully assessed, any major improvements will be fully assessed, and property sales and correction of errors will be properly assessed. So the province justified moving forward with this unexpected freeze as being an affordability measure. In fact, as I said, the name of the word affordability is actually in the bill. And I just want to highlight, in 2018, Liberal government implemented a one-year assessment freeze as well, and that resulted in the same year, and I think this was documented or reported by the CBC, that, 41 New Brunswick municipalities actually raised their property tax rates to balance their budgets in response to the freeze in 2018. And I guess, as this committee knows, we talked a lot about tax burden. The only way to really ensure tax bills are frozen is you'd also have to legislate tax rates to be frozen, which would be extremely difficult to do in a responsible fashion. Legislating frozen tax rates could result in significant cuts and do more harm than good to communities. As you know, municipal costs will continue to rise regardless of the assessment freeze. The Finance Committee, for example, has seen in just your tenure alone, I think Mr. Fogan mentioned earlier, capital projects doubling in cost. Well, due to supply chain pressures or inflation, that impacts our budget because as capital costs increase, so does interest and debt service costs. Other operating costs, such as wages and benefits, have been on the rise due to inflation. More social services are frequently being downloaded to municipalities. And it's not uncommon, as we heard with the splash pad discussion, service level enhancements are commonly requested. So just freezing assessments distorts property values. It creates inequities between taxpayers and reduces transparency. And I don't believe, it's my personal opinion, it's an effective tool actually to address affordability, but we'll get into that a little bit more. The reality is municipal wage and benefits, which comprise around 53% of our budget, historically has outpaced inflation. As you can see on the slide, cumulative wage increases since 2004 have exceeded CPI. Over the last few years, it hasn't, because CPI has been excessively high, but historically, the common trend is city wage packages have exceeded CPI. It's currently an employees market as well. There's a strong demand by organizations for skilled workers, professional labor. And the city also needs to be competitive to attract and compete in that market, which often puts pressure on wage costs. As the Finance Committee knows, New Brunswick has a binding arbitration process for public safety employees. That's not driven by CPI or market factors such as the supply of that particular labor or the turnover rates for that particular profession. But it's based on a formulaic system that's self-compounding using comparables comparable salaries, and that has led, and it's well documented, has led to unsustainable salary levels and salary cost increases for municipalities, and as seen in St. John, has led to a reduction in the workforce. There are other systemic factors outside the city's control that puts pressure on wages, such as employees on workers' compensation. It's out of the city's control. That puts upward pressure on wages and benefits to backfill those services that are voided. All these issues present real financial challenges for municipalities who rely extensively on property taxes to fund the services that we provide, all that can commonly exceed inflation. Assessment freezes are even more consequential to municipalities, given 80 to 85% of revenue collected is from property tax. That's a heavy reliance on one particular revenue source. And municipalities are not permitted in legislation to budget for deficits like the provincial government can, and do not have the authority to create new taxes, such as, for example, a tax on vacant land if we wished. There's no authority to do that. Nor do municipalities have a diversified revenue stream like the province to be able to mitigate the risk of an assessment freeze. And as FCM has widely communicated, really only 8 to 10 cents of every tax dollar paid by the taxpayer goes to municipalities. Mr. Fogan touched on this. St. John is not funding infrastructure at a rate to keep up with its infrastructure deficit. Based on asset management, the city should be funding somewhere between $37 and $40 million a year. The city funds 15 from debt and pay-as-you-go, and we rely extensively on other levels of government to fund the gap or the remainder. Fiscal reform that was introduced is welcome to help address some of that gap, but there's no question more funding is needed, which also puts pressure on the operating budget, because again, if we were to fund more capital through debt or pay-as-you-go, that puts pressure on the operating budget. That has to be funded by property tax revenue or offset through service reductions, cost reductions. Excuse me. I want to provide the Finance Committee a high-level financial impact assessment of what the property tax freeze could mean for the City of St. John. And again, we don't know the details of the fiscal package. Hopefully some of that will mitigate some of this exposure, but last year, the city experienced a 6.26% tax base increase, but only 1.65 of that increase was new construction. As assessment freeze based on if we look at an assessment freeze for 2026 and we assume the same parameters and gross it up maybe 10% just to account for maybe sales that happen throughout the year. Once we do that, you can see on the screen that this could result in lost revenue for the City of St. John somewhere in the vicinity of $7 million, $7.2 million. High level estimate, but it's order of magnitude. That would be equivalent to having to increase the tax rate by 7 cents in St. John. So it's significant. And do we have the flexibility to do that? It would be very difficult, competitive proposition for St. John to raise the tax rate by 7 cents when St. John's tax rate is 19 cents higher than Moncton's current tax rate, 24 cents higher than Fredericton, and just locally 29 and 38 cents higher than Quispam, Sis, and Rossa. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, as we do frequently in these meetings, property tax has been studied extensively for decades now, with conclusions of insufficient municipal funding, recommendations to overhaul municipal funding models, and for the provincial government to provide more tax room to municipalities, if not completely vacate the property tax altogether, rather than what we're seeing happening in 2026, which is the removal of tax room through a legislated assessment freeze. I just want to take the opportunity to address 3 other matters with the Finance Committee with respect to the assessment freeze. One, first, the decision to apply the assessment freeze to all classes of properties, including the non-residential property class and the heavy industrial property class. The potential impact the assessment freeze may have on the growth profile for St. John. And some fair tax advice that was provided by Enid Slack and Harry Kitchen on the impacts of an property assessment freeze. So Bill 22 proposes to put an assessment freeze on all classes of properties. That includes residential, non-residential, and heavy industrial classes. Again, the reason provided for the freeze was concerns respecting the rising cost burden of escalating assessments and the impact that has on affordability for property taxpayers. However, non-residential and heavy industrial property classes have benefited from property tax relief, primarily driven by a lower provincial property tax rate. So when looking at assessments, you can see certainly cause for concern on the slide with escalating residential assessments, which has grown on average by almost 10% per year over the last 4 years. That's 40% since 2022. That certainly outpaces inflation, CPI. The average inflation over the same 4-year period is a little bit over 4%. It is for this reason the city has advocated for years for fair taxation, which would allow municipalities to set separate tax rates for customer classes so that same inflationary burden can be more fairly spread over all property classes. The city in the same period reduced the tax rate by 16 cents since 2022. But because rates for non-residential and heavy industrial properties are coupled by a multiplier with the residential properties, cities do not have the tools to spread inflationary increase fairly and evenly over property classes. However, as you can see on the slide for the heavy industrial and non-residential tax classes, assessment for those classes on average are either equal to inflation over the last 4 years, or in the case of heavy industrial, the heavy industry class are 2 times lower than the average inflation over the 4-year period. So averaging about 2.1% for heavy industrial, around 4% for non-residential. If affordability is truly the concern, I guess we're not clear as to why the freeze was not at least applied only to the residential property class rather than all classes, all property classes that are assessed. So in 2023, the provincial government reduced the provincial property tax rate for non-residential and heavy industrial properties by 33 cents. Some of this relief was offset by municipalities in the same year stepping into some of that room through new authorities that's vacated by the province by increasing our multiplier from 1.5 to 1.7. So that only represented 19 cents of the 33 cents. Since 2023, the city has continued to reduce the municipal tax rate, and the non-residential and heavy industrial properties have benefited from that reduction, given those rates are still coupled with the residential tax rate. So as you can see on the slide, in 2022, if you look at the far right, the total combined property tax rate a non-residential or heavy industrial property would pay was $4.75. And in 2025, look below, with the continued tax rate reduction, and this incorporates the multiplier being increased, that rate is now $4.49. That's a reduction in rate of almost 26 cents since 2022. So when you consider assessments for those classes have increased with either with inflation or even less than inflation, and consider the property tax rate was significantly reduced since 2022 by up to 26 cents, it's difficult to understand how applying this policy to all properties makes sense if the concern is affordability, in particular to property tax. Understand all organizations have different affordability challenges. I'm really talking specifically about the property tax. And as a result, you can see since 2023, the value of the reduction in the provincial tax rate, upper part of the slide, 33 cents since 2023 is valued at $15.7 million, and I guess avoided property tax paid for the non-residential class in St. John, and $5.2 million for the heavy industrial class. And if you look at the bottom part of the slide, that's the impact of the increased multiplier. The cost of those classes from the city in collecting more revenue with an increased multiplier is $5.9 million for the non-residential class and pretty much around $2 million for the heavy industrial class. So overall, each class is paying, has avoided taxes because of these reductions in tax rates, about 9.7 million for the non-residential class overall, and about 3.2 million for the heavy industrial class since 2023. Just want to quickly highlight some other unintended consequences with respect to the property tax freeze. The freeze assesses the true fair market value of new construction. However, existing property assessments are frozen. So the loss of revenue from existing properties being frozen may need to be made up by some municipalities, as we discussed earlier, through increasing the tax rates, rather than collecting property tax revenue on true market value assessment. The increased property tax rate could get passed on, or would in this case, if it was increased, would get passed on to all customers, including new construction, who would therefore now be subsidizing the lost revenues from the other existing properties that are not truly assessed. Increased tax rates due to frozen assessments would reduce a new construction's project's return on investment, potentially payback period, and could, depending on how slim margins are, alter investment decisions to proceed with projects. If municipalities decide to absorb the freeze and balance budgets through service cuts, this will impact the desirability of the community. It will reduce the capacity to offer development incentives that will also have an impact potentially on growth. And then with respect to Slack and Kitchen's report, their report in 2017 actually discussed property tax freezes, and next slide gets into it more extensively, but they referred to that type of freeze as a phantom tax relief. Because municipal budgets are a zero-sum game, legislatively, municipalities must balance their budgets. You either pay in increased tax rates, or you pay through having less value for money that you're paying through service cuts. It's not an effective approach to affect community affordability. And all this leads to property assessments that are no longer transparent, they're no longer based on true fair market value methodologies. It creates valuation inequity between properties, and as I've just mentioned, subsidization within property taxpayers, creating uncertainty also for investors in the community. So consider a case in which two identical houses, one newly constructed and one that's about 2 years old, are on the same street, but are subject to a sale price plus freeze property assessment bill restriction. One neighbor's taxes are artificially reduced because they bought their house 2 years ago. The other neighbor's is assessed higher because it's assessed at its true market value and now has a higher tax rate due to subsidizing those other properties. Identical property wealth, same property value, yet one neighbor is paying more than the other. That's neither fair nor equitable. So lastly, I want to provide the tax fairness advice from Enid Slack and Harry Kitchen with respect to property assessment freezes, and just give you an idea of their credentials. Enid worked on municipal finance issues for over 35 years, has advised governments and private companies on public finance issues in Canada and abroad. She chaired the Municipal Port Property Tax Fairness Commission in Metro Vancouver in 2010, and was commissioner on the Vancouver Property Tax Policy Review Commission in 2007. And she received in 2013 the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for her work on municipal issues. Harry Kitchen, over the last 35 years, has completed more than 100 articles, reports, studies, books on ranges of issues for local government expenditures, finance, and governance, here and abroad. In addition, he has served as commissioner, advisor, and consultant for several municipal and provincial governments in Canada, and was awarded the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for his work with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I just want to read the quote from the Fair Tax Report. As you can see, they say, an assessment freeze creates serious inequities in the property tax system and should be removed as quickly as possible. Municipalities could increase their local tax rates to collect the same amount of revenue. Furthermore, the frozen assessment creates a much larger benefit in terms of taxes saved for those who are benefiting from increasing property values at the expense of those whose property values are rising slowly or not at all. In addition, freezing results in a phantom tax relief, the appearance of property tax relief where none actually exists. This situation arises because an increase in the tax rate that is required to raise revenues The result is that for some properties, a reduction in market value assessment actually results in higher property taxes. So any legislation that seeks to break the property assessment system by capping, freezing, otherwise distorting the relationship between property value and assessment, it could ultimately do more harm than good. And I think the concept of phantom tax relief simply alludes to the fact that freezing is basically a thinly disguised redistribution of the tax burden between customers. And at the end of the day, the cost of running a government needs to be funded and balanced through either tax rate increase or through service cost, still costing the taxpayer, but in a different way. So just before I end, I would just say for the record, I hope the property assessment freeze provides more reason for municipalities to continue its effort in continuous improvement, because that's another part of this. I hope it encourages municipalities to focus on performance and to continue to seek efficiencies and productivity improvements. As I expect for many municipalities, 2026 will be a challenging budget year. And with that, I'd be pleased to take any questions the Finance Committee may have.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. Your Worship or Councillor Radwan, do either of you have any questions or comments on the presentation? Your Worship, go ahead.
I don't have a question, but this is an excellent presentation. CFO Fudge, I find it explains so many things. I mean, everybody's sort of waving the pom-poms when it was first heard that the freeze on assessments, but when you actually drill down and you look at the impact of it, you look at especially St. John, where we're not a homogeneous residential only situation, when we have all these different with non-residential and heavy class, etc. The impact of it, what's been happening with the provincial tax, burden added onto it, it paints a completely different picture than what you initially, for anyone who wouldn't be involved in budgeting and the money that's going to be coming through that system. It completes another very sort of, I don't want to say a scary picture, but it certainly presents a picture that we know that 26, as you say, will be a challenge for us. So I do appreciate this because I think there's a lot of great information there. And I've got I'll be a part of the state of the region next week. So this is going to be very helpful for me as well as we go forward. So thank you. I'll move the recommendation.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Radwan, we'll put you down for a second.
I have one comment. Yeah, I do, Chair. Thank you. First of all, I've had some problems with technology today, and I thought I got to see everything, but I'm kind of looking through again. And staff do have a splash pad allotted in that plan for 2028 for the east side. And I was like, what? How did, anyway, and on top of that, so it was 2028 to 2030 that I was having issues with. And 2030, we're desperately needing changing rooms and washrooms at the res. It is so busy. Like, there's not enough parking a lot of the time there. It's incredible. So anyway, hats off to staff. So I'm sorry, just kind of going back on that other item. I just wanted to apologize because I thought I had the whole picture, and I didn't. But yeah, with this report, I mean, I think the other thing that people are not really realizing is, say, for example, my property taxes went up 20% last year. I would only end up actually paying 10%. But then the next year, I'd have to pay another 10%. So I don't think that's getting frozen. So people are thinking, I'm not going to have any increase. But if you had a huge increase, I don't see as part of that bill that you would still have an increase. Just not an increase in your property tax going up. And it just keeps reminding me over and over again about how unequitable our property taxes is when you look at how much is heavy industry paying versus business versus the residents. It's so incredibly frustrating. So I hope that we're going to start seeing changes move really quickly, and the whole system needs a revamp, which I know there's commitments to do that, but I hope we're not waiting 4 years to get this done so that it happens right before the next election. I hate to say it, but I want it to happen soon. We need it. With our infrastructure deficits, we need this ASAP.
Thanks, Councillor. And, I'll just build on that a little bit. Fiscal reform is with municipalities is not a new conversation in the province of New Brunswick. The previous government committed to it and missed their target date. The current government committed to it, and it looks like they're going to miss their target date. So it's certainly a big job. I think they are still committed to it. But I worry that without logic, start to fiddle with what we're currently using without the answer in mind. Folks would certainly understand that most recently, a few years back, and see, people forget, like a few years back, the government of the day in the province froze NB Power's rates. And poor NB Power is over there trying to do their business, and the province stepped in, even though NB Power is supposed to be at arm's length, and passed legislation and froze their rates and put restrictions on what NB Power could charge for electricity. And what has that in part led to? Well, massive NB Power rate shock over the last 2 years as they try to get back on track, partly because of those freezes. And so I hope we have more information sooner rather than later. And this isn't it for us going into budget 2026. Because as you mentioned, Councillor Radwin, many residential properties have not caught up from the previous freeze. So another freeze, that gap that is going to show up on property assessment bills is just going to grow. And at some point in time, likely that catch-up mechanism is going to come to bear. So, I hope the province comes sooner rather than later, and I am hopeful that they come up with some mitigation for municipalities going into next year, so that it doesn't cause the chaos that it has potential to cause. And I'll end on that. Did we have a receive and file with tiers? So moved by Councillor Radwin, seconded by Your Worship. All in favor of that receive and file signify by saying aye. Raising your hand. Aye. Contrary minded, carried. That brings us to the end. So just a quick recap, because I hate to end on a downer. We're going to looking forward to internal audit coming back with the scope of work. Look at our winter snow plan. Our controller brought us solid results for the first quarter of this year. It's early, but we seem to be on track and have things under control. Moving into our budget timeline, shape your budget, getting feedback, and moving into that process. Happily excited to have that 5-year capital plan that we can present to council and move forward and talk to our partners about that. I think that is only good things for the city, and we will watch with bated breath to see what the next steps the province has with regards to revenues from municipalities for 2026. So with that, the mayor's camera's off, so I'll go to Councillor Radwin for a motion to adjourn.
Okay, I don't usually, but motion to adjourn.
Sorry about that. I was trying to influence my background.
No, that's okay. We have motion to adjourn. So thanks very much to staff for the work you put in preparing and for hanging out to support us. Thanks, Councillor and Your Worship, our committee. With all of that, we are adjourned. Have a great night.
Thanks. Good night.